Hi, I'm John Peters, and this is the first in my workshop on encaustic, or the first video. So what is encaustic? Encaustic, the main ingredient is beeswax. It's a combination of beeswax, Damar varnish, and your pigment. Your end result, what you want to make, is your color. This is where you start from, and then once you have your color and you start to apply it to the surface that you're going to work on, then there'll be some other technical things we can talk about. But in this video, we're going to concentrate on just how to make your encaustic medium. So the first ingredient is beeswax. Now there's several different kinds of beeswax, and the best beeswax to use is filtered beeswax. If you don't buy filtered beeswax, you end up with wax that looks like this. And this is unfiltered, and it has the impurities that come from the natural beeswax. So that would be parts of the bee or pollen or things like that. So this wax goes through a filtering machine and you end up with a translucent block of wax. Now another thing is I buy my wax in 1 pound cakes, and I found out through trial and error that's just a lot easier to use. When I first started to work with beeswax, I really didn't know what I was doing, and I bought I think 25 pounds of unfiltered beeswax. And so it came in a block like this, and this is half the block, and it's really hard to work with. You have to break it apart with a hammer, and it's messy, and so I'll keep this around, and someday I'll do something with it. But for now, if you're going to order it in 1 pound cakes. The next main ingredient is the Damar crystals. Now what this is, it's a sap from a specific tree, and in the crystals are a lot of impurities like bark and anything that you might find on a tree. So this needs to be cooked down with the wax, and the impurities need to be filtered out. The ratio for my recipe, and really most people who work with encaustic, their recipe is usually 8:1. So that would mean if I'm going to melt down a 1 pound block of wax, which is 16 ounces, I would use 2 ounces of the Damar crystals. I've laid this out in the order that it will take to get my encaustic color. So I have my 1 pound cake of filtered beeswax, that's 16 ounces of filtered beeswax. This is 2 ounces of the Damar crystals. I'll cook this down to a liquefied state, pour it through a filter to get my encaustic medium. So this is a combination of the beeswax and the Damar varnish. And once it's liquefied, I pour it into a cupcake holder to get these very manageable size bits of wax to work with. After that, when it's in a liquefied state, I'll cook this down again, and then I'll add some oil paint. Some people use powdered pigments. I use oil paint because I always have it readily available. You can't use acrylic paint. And so the last step, or the last product, is your encaustic color. The main tool you'll need to make encaustic medium is some kind of a heating pot or a crock pot. I like to have a temperature gauge on mine. I try not to get my wax too close to 200 degrees. I work with it right around 180, 190 degrees. When you're melting the Damar, you do have to raise the heat a little bit, and I'll go into that a little further when I actually start to make the encaustic medium. In this batch, I'm going to make 4 pounds of encaustic medium. So I'll need 8 ounces of the Damar crystals added to the 4 pounds of wax. But what I like to do is melt down just a half a pound of wax, and then I'll add my crystals, because the crystals melt at a little bit higher temperature than the wax, and I don't want to heat up the whole 4 pounds. And also there's a lot of impurities in the Damar crystals, and once the crystals and this half pound of wax liquefy, I'll then filter them, put it back into the pot, and then I'll add the 3.5 pounds of wax. The plastic cup weighs 1 ounce, so I'll add for a total of 9 ounces for my measurement. I like to pulverize the crystals into a powder. It just makes them melt a little faster in the wax. now that the block of wax has liquefied, I'm going to add the damar. I should also add that the wax liquefies at around 180 degrees, and the damar you have to cook a little bit hotter, and that's another reason why I don't like to cook the whole batch at one time. You can see how thick this is. It's going to be a lot easier to handle in a small batch, and then I'll take it out once it liquefies and filter it through one of these paint filters, and then I'll add the rest of the wax. I've been mixing this for about 10 minutes, and finally all the damar is liquefied. What I'm going to do now is pour it into this plastic container, and you can see I've reinforced the filter on this filter cup with some painter's tape, and now I'll pour my solution through the filter, and you can see all the bark and impurities being captured in the filter. You see that? I always have paper towels on hand so I can then wipe the pot out, because there's still some impurities in the pot. And once that's cleaned, then I'll pour the mixture that's now in the plastic cup. Before that cools down, I'll pour that through another filter back into the pot. So it's sort of a double filter. So I have my clean pot, and I'm going to pour the solution back through a clean filter, and that gets most all of the impurities out. So now that I have my half of a pound with my 8 ounces of varnish, I can put the rest of my beeswax in and melt that down. So while this is melting down, I'll give you a quick art history lesson. And that's because I'm always surprised to see how many people don't know who Jasper Johns is, yet they work with Encaustic, or they're interested in Encaustic. So anyway, Jasper Johns is a pop artist. He's famous for painting the American flag, targets, numbers, and his primary medium is Encaustic. Now there's an interesting story how he became interested in Encaustic, and it goes like this. I saw an interview where he says he had a dream that he painted the American flag, so the next day he gets up and goes to paint the American flag, and he's using enamel house paint. Well, it didn't dry fast enough for him, and somehow he had heard about Encaustic wax medium, and so that's how he started to use that material. And the reason is it dries immediately. Once the wax cools, you can then work on it. So if you look at his paintings, you can see it's got a lot of texture. The paintings have a lot of texture, and he uses newspaper, and he sort of builds the paintings up almost like a collage. So anyway, he's definitely worth checking out. That's why I became interested in Encaustic. I saw Jasper Johns' white flag at MoMA, and so right away I started to look into Encaustic, and it took me a while to figure out what I would do with it, but eventually I started making paintings like the one behind me here, and this sort of has, I would say, like a Kenneth Nolan feel, or a Joseph Albiers. I think with art, everything sort of looks like something. Everybody sort of affects you as an artist. You sort of just continue. It's a continuum. So anyway, this is liquefied, and now I'm going to pour it into my little cupcake tin here. You may have noticed that I have paper on my work table, and that's because I only work with Encaustic a few times a year, sort of get burnt out on it, and then I work on something else. But you don't want a lot of beeswax all over your studio, because it creates an adhesion problem with whatever else you may be working on. So once I finish working with Encaustic, the paper's taped down, I just sort of fold it up and throw it away, and then I put all my wax and all my brushes and whatever tools I'm using into a plastic container, and I just keep it there until I go to work with Encaustic again. So now this is cooled down. You could speed the process up if you want to by putting the tray in the freezer, but it just takes a couple hours. Okay, so now I have my little cakes, and I can melt them down with some oil paint, and that's how I'll make the color. Now I have all my Encaustic blocks that it's the medium and the wax mixed together. I was able to get a little more than 24 of the cupcake shapes out of the 4-pound batch that I made. So I'm going to take 3 of these, and I'm going to make some color now. Now, it's a good idea to try to extract some of the oil that's in the oil paint. And I found that a piece of masonite really does a good job of that. So I'll put some paint on the masonite and just sort of spread it out so there's a lot of paint on the surface, and what that'll do is just draw the oil out of the paint. And the color that I'm going to make will be sort of a light yellow. So I'm going to add some white pigment and some yellow. So you can see the oil right there. Now, some people use a paper towel. You could also use cardboard. But I always have some of this masonite around, so that's just what I use. So I'll let that sit there for a couple of minutes, and I'll scrape it up and put it in the pot. In the meantime, I'm going to start to melt down my Encaustic medium. Now, it's important, you don't want to work with this Encaustic medium over 200 degrees. In fact, you should really keep it right around 180. The wax, if you start to smoke the wax, it makes a toxic chemical. It's also good to work in a ventilated area. Now, I have a fan that I turn off because it's too loud and it would interfere with the video I'm making, but normally there's always a fan going. And you can see all these brushes over here, and the thing with Encaustic is you really can't clean a brush. So I keep my brushes and I use them for like colors. So in this case, since I'm making a yellow paint, I'll use this brush that I obviously had used for making yellow paint in the past. So this has sort of melted down almost, and what I'm going to do now is take my knife and just pull that white paint off there, and you can see the darkness, that's the oil residue. And I'll pull the yellow off, same thing. So there's a lot less oil now in this pigment. And then I'll put it right into the pot, and that will start to color this wax medium. And you know, it's a good idea to put your brush in the pot too, and that softens up the bristles and sort of lets you work the medium into, or the color into the Encaustic medium. Well, that's the end of part 1 of my Encaustic workshop. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you learned something. The next video will be on surface. What surfaces to use Encaustic on, and what surfaces you shouldn't use Encaustic on. Now, if you need to know, or if you'd like to know more about Encaustic, where to get beeswax, or where I got my beeswax in my Damar, I'll put that up on my blog. So if you search part 1 of my Encaustic workshop, you should be able to find that. And I'll also put some links to some videos that I've found interesting about Encaustic. Okay, thanks for watching, and remember, be safe,
You really should use some ventilation when you're working with encaustic. And in fact, I generally use a mask when I'm working with encaustic. So keep that in mind, and thanks for watching.